Hey everyone, Will here. So for today's video, we are going to be analyzing the Niagara Movement. That means we're going to be going over all aspects of this civil rights organization, including the origins of this group, the accomplishments of this group, and the legacy of this group. So without further ado, let's begin. So the Niagara Movement was a Black American civil rights organization that was founded in 1905 by some of the most influential African American lawyers and civil rights leaders of that time. The main mission of the group was to combat Jim Crow laws, while also combating the ideology of conciliation that was supported by other iconic civil rights leaders like Booker T. Washington. So the story behind the Niagara Movement begins back during the Reconstruction Era. After the end of the US Civil War, African Americans began to have more rights and freedoms than they had previously been able to hold. In the South, formerly enslaved Black Americans were now able to vote, hold public office, and contract for their work for the first time in US history. Unfortunately, however, as the Reconstruction Era came to an end, these newfound rights and freedoms began to disappear. From 1890 to 1908, many lawmakers in southern states began to ratify new constitutions and laws that significantly restricted the political and civil rights of Black Americans. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson saw the legal upholding of racial segregation when the court ruled that laws requiring separate but equal facilities were constitutional. The reality was that segregated facilities and services for Black Americans were made substantially less adequate than those made for white Americans. These racist policies helped keep massive disparities between Black Americans and white Americans in place for the coming decades. In order to combat these new laws and policies, prominent civil rights leader Booker T. Washington discussed what became known as the Atlanta Compromise in an 1895 speech to supporters in Atlanta, Georgia. Washington believed that hard work, economic progress, and merit would give Black Americans their own autonomy in the American economy, eventually leading to the end of Jim Crow laws and the era of racial segregation. Through his work in creating the Tuskegee Institute and other similar organizations, Washington sought to provide opportunities for Black Americans all across the country. Booker T. Washington's strategy for achieving civil rights received both support and criticism from civil rights activists. Opponents of Washington's ideology included Atlanta University professor W.E.B. Du Bois and activist William Monroe Trotter, the co-founder of the Boston Guardian newspaper. While Du Bois agreed that hard work and education were important for uplifting Black Americans, he refuted the idea that racial equality would be brought upon primarily through either of these means. Du Bois believed that social change and full civil rights for Black Americans would be achieved primarily through community organizing and protest. While both Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had the same goal for achieving full civil rights for Black Americans, their approaches and strategies for achieving their goal were very different. In 1902 and 1903, groups of activists who supported W.E.B. Du Bois sought to have more speaking time in the conventions of the National Afro-American Council, which was led by Booker T. Washington. The activists soon realized, however, that the conventions were largely dominated by Washington supporters who were known as Bookerites. In July of 1903, William Monroe Trotter attempted to confront Booker T. Washington during one of his speeches, questioning the effectiveness of his movement. Unfortunately, a minor skirmish broke out during the event, during which Trotter and others were arrested. The skirmish later received national press coverage. Washington later pressed charges against Trotter for disrupting the meeting, which led to him spending 30 days in the Charles Street jail. After this all occurred, William Monroe Trotter stated that there was no plan to break up or disrupt Washington's meeting. This skirmish led to increased division within the civil rights movement. In an effort to mend these divisions, Booker T. Washington, along with American businessman and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, organized a meeting in New York to unite civil rights leaders. While W.E.B. Du Bois and some of his supporters were invited to the meeting, William Monroe Trotter was not invited. The meeting laid the groundwork for a committee to include both Washington and Du Bois. However, the committee fell apart in 1905 when Du Bois felt that his core message was not being given the attention that it needed. Both Du Bois and Trotter believed that a well-organized activist group would be needed to amplify their message and achieve their goals. W.E.B. Du Bois and William Monroe Trotter then organized their own national conference alongside Frederick McGee, an African-American criminal defense lawyer, and Charles Edwin Bentley, an African-American dentist. These four men scheduled their conference to be held from July 11th to July 13th in 1905. Du Bois and his team invited 59 civil rights leaders who shared his activist mindset. 29 of the invited leaders ended up attending the conference, many of whom were prominent community leaders and lawyers. These 29 individuals would later become known as the Original 29. The conference was originally planned to be held in Buffalo, New York. However, the meeting was later moved to the Erie Beach Hotel in Fort Erie, Ontario, in Canada. The meeting was notably held near the famous Niagara Falls. During the meeting, the Niagara Movement was officially founded. W.E.B. Du Bois was chosen to be the General Secretary, and Cincinnati lawyer George H. Jackson was chosen to be the Treasurer. Several committees were also established during the meeting in order to oversee progress on the organization's goals and objectives. The group planned to use state chapters to advance local agendas while distributing information about the Niagara Movement and its overall mission. 17 founders were each chosen as state secretaries, representing 16 of the states of the Union, as well as Washington, D.C. Clement G. Morgan represented Massachusetts, George F. Miller represented New York, George W. Mitchell represented Pennsylvania, Byron Gunner represented Rhode Island, T.A. Spraggins represented New Jersey, Garnett Russell Waller represented Maryland, Frederick McGee represented Minnesota, John Hope represented Georgia, J.R. Clifford represented West Virginia, Charles Edwin Bentley represented Illinois, Bergen S. Smith represented Kansas, Chester A. Franklin represented Colorado, Richard Hill represented Tennessee, Carter G. Woodson represented Iowa, James Robert Lincoln Diggs represented Virginia, Frank B. Coffin represented Arkansas, and Lafayette Hershaw represented Washington, D.C. itself. The attendees of the first Niagara Movement meeting drafted a declaration of principles that was based upon the work of W.E.B. Du Bois and William Monroe Trotter. This declaration showcased both the group's philosophy as well as their political, social, and economic demands. The declaration called for equal economic opportunity for all American citizens, pointing out how rural districts of the South had institutionalized the practice of sharecropping, which essentially locked many Black Americans into a form of indentured servitude. The Declaration also sought for all African Americans in the South to have the ability to earn a good wage for their work. The Declaration of Principles additionally called for many social changes as well, emphasizing how education should not only be made free for all, but also mandatory. The Declaration then called for improvements to high school facilities that were not adequately maintained. In terms of the criminal justice system, the Declaration called for judges to be selected independently of their race, while also discussing how convicted criminals should be given equal punishments for their respective crimes. The Declaration also advocated for the abolition of the convict lease system, in which convicts could be leased out to work as cheap laborers for railway contractors, large plantation owners, and mining companies. The Declaration emphasized how each person should be considered equal and free under the law of the land. The Declaration also covered the unfair treatment that Black Americans often received from labor unions. Finally, the document condemned Jim Crow laws, the rejection of Black Americans from enlistment in the Navy and in military academies, segregation within churches, as well as the non-enforcement of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution in protecting the rights of Black Americans. The Declaration additionally offered thanks to those who stand for equality and the advancement of the Niagara Movement cause. After the first meeting of the Niagara Movement, delegates returned to their home states to establish local chapters. In December of 1905, W.E.B. Du Bois founded a small magazine called the Moon Illustrated Weekly, which sought to emphasize the ideas of the Niagara Movement. Unfortunately, however, this publication failed a few months after its release due to a lack of funding. In August of 1906, the organization held its first public meeting in Harper's Ferry in Virginia on the campus of Storer College. The members chose this meeting place for its historical significance, since the location was the site of abolitionist John Brown's 1859 anti-slavery raid. The location had even more significance since Storer College was originally founded as a Baptist school with the mission of educating formerly enslaved African Americans. Many of the Niagara Movement state chapters made meaningful contributions to the fight for civil rights. In 1906, the Massachusetts chapter was able to successfully lobby against state legislation that promoted the segregation of railroad cars. The Illinois chapter also made progress for civil rights when they persuaded Chicago theater critics to ignore a production of The Klansman, which was a racist stage play that commemorated the Ku Klux Klan. In 1907, the Niagara Movement, in association with the Constitution League, began organizing legal challenges to segregationist laws. Although the mission was ambitious, the team only had the funding to launch a single case challenging Virginia's railroad segregation law. This case eventually failed, however, putting the legal team in debt. The year of 1907 also marked the debut of W.E.B. Du Bois's second publication, which was called The Horizon, a journal of the color line. This publication was successful and lasted until 1910, with Freeman H. M. Murray and Lafayette M. Hershaw serving as the publication's co-editors. The 1907 Niagara Movement meeting was held in Boston and had conflicting attendance reports. W.E.B. Du Bois claimed that the event had 800 attendees, while the Washington Bee, a newspaper supporting Booker T. Washington, claimed that the event only had 100 attendees. In 1907, William Monroe Trotter officially resigned from the Niagara Movement due to internal disagreements he had with W.E.B. Du Bois and other members of the organization. This, alongside disagreements over which political party to support in the 1908 U.S. presidential election, led to the eventual end of the Niagara Movement. The final years of the Niagara Movement were marked by a unification of both the W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington factions of the civil rights movement. After the organization's last annual meeting in 1910, civil rights activists eventually joined together in support of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. This unification was achieved since both factions opposed Jim Crow laws and supported full civil rights for Black Americans, even if they had disagreements on the tactics necessary to achieve these goals. The NAACP went on to become the leading African American civil rights organization of the 20th century, building upon the work of both Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Overall, the Niagara Movement played a key role in the fight for civil rights throughout the late 1800s and the early 1900s, laying the groundwork for the eventual rise of the NAACP and other civil rights organizations in the 20th and 21st centuries. Before ending this week's video, I want to give a special shout out to my friend David's channel, Urbanism from the Left. Urbanism from the Left covers major trends in urban development and planning through a socialist lens. Whether you support socialism or not, this channel provides a good way to study and analyze a political viewpoint in world history. The link to Urbanism from the Left is in the description below, so be sure to check it out. Thank you for checking out our video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more additional content. If you have any ideas for a future video topic, please leave a comment and let me know what you would like to see me cover next. I'm really hoping to grow this channel and provide you all with more content in the future, and your support means the world to me. Thanks, everyone.